this is just a quick introduction. Today is the Aspen City Council's work session for August 8th, 2022. The item on our agenda today is a sketch plan review, but we're going to start off with a site visit, and here is Jim True to tell us all more.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is before council on a sketch plan review pursuant to the city code. And it will start with a visit to the site itself. A sketch plan review is a public meeting. It does require taking minutes, but no formal decisions can be made during a sketch plan review. At the site visit, we are not going to be recording that. We don't have the procedures to record that. And what I do like to request everyone to do in a site visit is just not have substantive debate about issues or otherwise discuss the substance. Just to view the grounds, to view monuments that would help you understand what is being proposed. But I would suggest, and I assume the theater people will be present, that they...
Excuse me, Maya's gonna leave me now.
I'm sorry? In any event, that they will be present, and I just ask them not to do anything other than...
He was a Zoom troller.
...direct the members that are here of the Open Space and Trails Board, P&Z, and Council as to where the processes are. Once we come back, there will be a presentation by the staff and the potential applicant, and Council and the two boards will be free to ask questions. But again, no decisions can be made at this meeting. Minutes will be taken and will be published at a later date. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I will join you on the site visit. That's all I have.
Thanks, Jim. All right, with that, please leave your TVs on to GrassRoots, and we'll be back.
Don't touch that dial.
Enjoy the logo.
Skippy is in Washington State.
Don't mean to have the best one without telling you.
Hey, Ted. That's Ted Bash. Are you kidding me?
Actually.
Is there a balance? So, because they would. That's first. Yeah, very.
I don't know if all of that's true. The haircut certainly is.
Thanks and welcome back. This is the Aspen City Council work session for August 8th, 2022. We are just returning back to council chambers from a brief site visit down at Rio Grande Park. And our agenda item this evening is the Theater Aspen Sketch Plan Review. And with that, I will turn it over to the team at the table. And Jed, maybe you want to introduce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, distinguished council members and honored guests. Thank you for setting aside time to have this discussion today. I will begin by introducing my colleagues here at the table. To my far left, our General Manager, Michael Rader. To my immediate left, Charles Cuniff, who is the architect who's been working on the designs with us. And to my right, Alan Richmond, who is our zoning and planning consultant, who I know many of you are very familiar with. I think I would say that this is a play in 3 acts today. Act 1 is a basic description of how we're imagining this approach from a conceptual standpoint. Act 2 is Alan to talk a little bit about the backstory and the history of this site and the theater's involvement there. And then Act 3 will be Charles talking in some detail about what our conceptual thinking has been to date. I want to stipulate from the very beginning that we are well aware of the complexity of what we're talking about. This is not a weekend fixer-upper in the backyard, not by any stretch. And I think that our hope and objective today is to get some mutual concurrence and enthusiasm that this is a general idea that is worth exploring, and we expect to devote the time and the resources and to engage with the Parks Department and anybody else that you tell us are important stakeholders in this to work through the many challenges that an idea like this would certainly entail. So just to sort of level set where we a beginning for ourselves, and hoping these slides will actually advance. Well, I don't know.
That's it.
Thanks so much. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Over here, in this corner? Okay. Okay, we did the introductions. So the basic idea today is to discuss the creation of a below-ground theater with a green roof on the historic Theater Aspen tent site. This new idea would include a 275-seat theater. The current theater is 201 seats, so a modest increase. Those 275 seats would be divisible so that if we or anybody else was presenting an attraction that attracted fewer folks, they wouldn't feel like they were sitting in the middle of an empty, half-empty theater. It would be climate controlled for use in the summer as well as the winter. And there would be a flexible second space that could accommodate up to 100. In theater terminology, we refer to that as a black box, meaning that it can be shaped as needed. It would be used for education classes, rehearsals, could be available for community events, any number of uses. Our whole idea here is really consolidation, programmatic consolidation as opposed to programmatic expansion. We currently engage with the community in many different venues in many different places, and I wouldn't say that they would all vanish if this theater were built, but many would be consolidated under this roof. Why should we do this? Well, we think that there is unmet demand for year-round theater and performance space. Not only do we have ambition about performing in what we now refer to as the off-season, but we also know that community demand, whether it's the Aspen Community Theater, whether it's the groups that at one time were lobbying for the Wheeler expansion, that are not being served by existing indoor spaces. They're either too big or they're not fitted out in a way that is conducive to what they're trying to do. And also, we can't help but be struck by the overwhelming passage of ballot measure 2A, which, of course, was a referendum just with Aspen citizens, not with visitors or homeowners who vote elsewhere, who seem to be very enthusiastic about more art, whether it's individuals or in groups. So what will a new facility accomplish? It will serve audiences year-round. It will allow us to expand our education offerings, and it will allow us to upgrade our stage technology to meet audience needs and industry standards. It will become an attraction to artists who are not interested in engaging with the sort of status of the tent right now. But most importantly are these first two things, is being able to serve audiences on a 12-month basis and to be able to expand our educational offerings for students. If there was a sort of one summary of these 4 or 5 slides, I would say that ask you to remember our ambition, our vision is that a world-class home will provide our community with a treasured national resource for generations to come. This is something that is very forward-looking and we think will serve this community for a very long time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Alan to talk a little bit about the history of the theater in the park.
Okay. Everybody hear me? I'm going to run you through a quick course in Rio Grande property planning history. That history dates back to the early 1970s when the Rio Grande property came into city ownership. When you think about the Rio Grande property, that site today, you know, your image of it is one of an incredible open space recreation and cultural center in Aspen that you saw today. But in the 1970s, it was a very different site. It was a site that had a more industrial character, and it was a site that really was not integrated into Aspen to any great degree at all. It was quite frankly neglected by the public. The area that we walked around today down towards the river was once used as a city snow dump. The area where the skate park and the recycle center, I'm pretty sure that that's the area that I'm thinking of, where those are located, that's where the city and county police department and sheriff's office had their impound lots. The site basically resembled, in more ways than one, the former rail yard that it had once been. But in the early 1980s, a comprehensive planning effort was undertaken to envision what this property could become. A Rio Grande task force was created, and it had design assistance from no less than Fritz Benedict's office. And they came up with a proposal that the property be used for a performing arts center, a jail, a parking structure, transit facility, library, and recreation. So the site that we're talking about back in the 80s, much larger than just the area down by the tent. It obviously comes up to this part of Aspen. The jail was the first major structure that emerged from those plans, and it was built, I believe, sometime in the late 80s. In 1988, then, Council, building on the work of the Rio Grande Task Force, adopted an SPA plan for a few more of the planned uses, specifically for the parking structure, the library, and the playfield. And soon after, the parking structure and the library were built. So some of the major pieces that we see today really emerged from the plan that was created in the early 1980s. The Performing Arts Center, which was one of the key elements of that early plan, was planned, if you can imagine, as a 1,000-seat facility. And it would have been built in the area where the library is now located. It was also going to be built where Cap's Auto Supply was, which is where Community Bank is today. And there was an election about arts versus parts, and Rachel is nodding her head. She remembers it well. But it was dropped in 1988 from the SPA plan. And in 1988, it's the first time that the city formally designated an area for arts usage where the tent is now located. In developing that 1988 SPA plan, the city was working very, very closely with a number of arts groups. And the arts groups were represented at that time by Richie Cohn, who some of you may remember. Richie basically told council that the arts groups were prepared to relinquish their claims to what we now know as the library site if assurances could be given that the Performing Arts Center could be located elsewhere on the site. So in the 1988 SPA plan approval, there was a condition that said, and I'm quoting now, "The city shall reserve the area known as the snow dump for future arts usage." So that's the first time that the city is saying this is something that we're going to get behind. Now, the reservation of that area for arts usage actually coincided with the initial theater performances in Rio Grande Park. It's back in 1987 that Kent Reed of Aspen Theater Company first approached the city with a request to place a temporary tent on the snow dump site. So in the winter, it was snow dump, and in the summer, there was a tent there. The city found that acceptable, and that was a temporary use permit that was issued. Every year, Aspen Theater Company had to come back into City Council and ask for another approval, and from 87 through 95, those annual approvals were granted. In 1989, Mr. Reed also came in and said, wouldn't it be nice if we created a temporary art park environment around the tent to start to beautify it and to allow us to landscape around the tent to buffer it from what was being then planned, which was a snow melter that was going to go in the area where the impound lot is, which is now the recycle area. That leads us to 1990, and a volunteer citizen group forms, and there are a number of names. Harry Teague was involved, Sarah Pletz, Julia Marshall, David Floria, Carol Lowenstern represented the Aspen Theater Company. They formed around the idea of creating an art park along the river. The city actually provided funds to that group in its budget process and said as a condition of getting that funding, the group needed to offer the city ideas to help in moving the snow dump off the Rio Grande property. So the city was starting to see that the Rio Grande property was becoming integrated into this community, and the snow dump needed to move out of town. In 1991, the Art Park Citizens Group actually hired me as their planning consultant, and we prepared an SPA plan that we submitted to the city. And the statement of intent for that plan, I think, is important. It says that the intent of this SPA plan is to create a riverfront greenway and arts corridor connecting to other open space and public use parcels along the river. This proposal will substantially beautify an area which has previously been used as the city's dumping ground, but which we believe should be considered one of its most valued land resources. Pretty prescient to those people 30 years ago to see what we saw today as just an utter gem. The art park was described by the group as a way to create a garden out of a wasteland. This poster that you see behind you was one of the outcomes of that process. The application was the other. You can see that the centerpiece of it is the theater tent with a sculpture hill or a berm or a mound next to it. The concept was accepted by the city in 1993 when the Rio Grande Master Plan and SPA Plan were adopted. And then the group which really, at that point, was hundreds and hundreds of city volunteers. I see one of them sitting to the side of Mayor Tory wearing the shirt that was given out on the Art Park work days that happen each and every spring. There were volunteer efforts. Rachel can tell you there were hundreds of people there. They moved. The soil that they were moving was basically old rail yard waste. And materials that had melted into the ground from the snow that was taken off of the city streets. They planted trees, they moved dirt, and they started creating that park. In 1995, Aspen Theater in the Park submitted a request to the city to eliminate the temporary use reviews and have a formal land use approval. That was granted by the city council that year, and that was the time that the tent, the stage, and the seating area began to become more of a permanent fixture, not something that just disappeared in the winter entirely. The tent would go away, but the stage and seating area started to have more permanence. That application, part of the approval was to classify the facilities as an essential public facility. And you know what that has meaning in growth management terms, and that has meaning in affordable housing terms. A few years later, your City Parks Department began the process of planning for the John Denver Sanctuary. Charles was telling you that Jeff Woods, who I had a conversation with a week or so ago, told me that he and Annie Denver were looking for where to put the sanctuary in the park. And they actually made a specific decision that it should go next to the theater tent. They felt those two uses would be compatible. Annie had then and still has a real strong feeling, positive feeling about the theater. And they thought the two uses would support and benefit each other. In the application, we call that a symbiotic relationship between the two. And then in 2011 is the more recent approval that we were talking about on the site. The city was approving the master plan. Go to the next. The master plan for the site, that's your City Parks Rio Grande master plan, and the John Denver Sanctuary at the time was in the process of being completed. Theater Aspen was able to work very closely with the City Parks Department on those plans. The permanent lobby was one of the outcomes of that process, and the internal framework of the tent was allowed to remain year-round while the membrane came off. And again, the site was designated as an essential public facility for growth management and affordable housing purposes. So what three lessons can we learn from the history, if you could go to the next? First, you can see that in each of the plans which the city has adopted for the Rio Grande Park since the early 1980s, there's been a location designated first for a performing arts center and then for a theater within the park. That has been a consistent and continuous theme for 35 years. For the last 35 years, the identified location has been where the theater tent presently sits. It's actually 40 years because the Performing Arts Center is about 82. Second, we see that this site has gone from being a neglected wasteland, a place where impounded cars were stored and where snow was dumped in the winter, into the exquisite gem of an art park and sanctuary that we see today. This has happened because Aspen residents and City Park staff felt passionately about what this area could become, and they gave their time to make it happen. But what that tells me is it's also important for us to see that this park is it's not a national park. It's not a pristine natural environment that's never been touched by people and never should be touched by people. This is land that was once a rail yard. It was a dumping ground, and it's been transformed by hard work into one of the most beautiful parks in the entire city. That happened because people made it happen. What we're asking you today is to trust that this theater group can work together with the city to build this theater project and yet make this site even more beautiful and more usable by the public than it is today. That's the mission that Jed has set out from day one for all of us on this team. And finally, we see that the theater concept has evolved over time. It started as a proposed 1,000-seat performance facility along Mill Street. Then, over the years, it was scaled down precipitously to a temporary circus tent, to a larger, more structurally sound tent, to a place where the stage and seating became year-round, to the place where it has the tent today with the permanent lobby and entry structure. This evolution was not accidental, and it didn't happen under the cover of night. It happened because of careful step-by-step consideration by the people around this table, and it was approved by the city over a period of 35 years. we believe that the next step in that evolution is what's coming before you tonight. And Charles, it's up to you to present that.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the sidewalk today. I think that was kind of an easier way to show what we're talking about than anything else. Oh, my apologies.
Thank you. Yeah, and you'll have to speak really right into it, Charles, for the viewing audience.
It wasn't on either.
Yeah.
I recovered from blisters from that same effort of wielded a shovel and a rake and carried a lot of rocks around. It was a great community effort to turn that into the art park back then. And I've been involved with the theater pretty much since then, since the circus tent time. To bring up the speed, this is the entrance to the park. We're all familiar with this, really. Right now, you're coming across the bridge and you're seeing the tent structure, which is, it's not bad, but it could be a lot nicer than what you're seeing there. In a funny way, Annie Denver and Jeff Wood stood right in this spot when they decided this was the place to put the John Denver Sanctuary. In a funny way, when I was looking at the overall site plan, the John Denver Sanctuary is really secondary to the theater tent because of the amount of space commandeered by the theater tent and the not very attractive space around the tent. If we do something with the theater and put it underground and bring the landscape over it, we actually make the John Denver Sanctuary the primary focus of that area rather than the theater. But provided we have enough of a marquee entrance, a nice entrance to the theater building, that's all the public really needs to see to engage with the theater. The rest of the area down there is part of the park. It becomes a park that happens to have a theater tucked under it, rather than a theater tent that's sitting on top of a park.
Keep going.
Yeah. So this is, you saw the image we started with that had the theater, the lobby structure over the pond. This is a rendition of if the lobby structure was replaced with an entrance to the theater, it could be roughly the same. It wouldn't be as prominent in terms of it's having a peak, but it would have about the same presence onto the plaza that everybody enjoys today. And that's a magical place. I hope some of you go to the theater because it's a really great experience. And in the evening, when you're there in the evening and the lobby is opened up and you're engaging with the people that are coming to the theater, it's a beautiful place to be. And you can wander up to the John Denver Sanctuary for a moment, come back in and go into the theater. That's really the part of Theater Aspen that's important, is the part that faces the plaza. The rest of it is just a necessary shelter for the activities that happen within it. And should we be able to cover that over with park, what better way to bring the park back in prominence and have the theater be a really nice participant in the park rather than commandeering the park. There you go. So this is a view looking down from the southeast, looking down and seeing how what I just described, the entrance to the theater opens out to the plaza, similar with the doors that can open up and provide additional shelter when it's active and they close down when it's not. The John Denver Sanctuary is over to the right, and the park and the ponds and the sanctuary can all blend together in a much more natural way. So there's no kind of limits where the public can go, but then after that, you feel like you're fenced off, that there's a building that you are not allowed to go to. And these are very sketchy, by the way, but this is the John Denver Sanctuary view looking back up. You can see that what we talked about on the site there, we can blend the hill up and over the building and then down the other side, so you could walk seamlessly from the sanctuary to town and vice versa. And perhaps the theater entrance could even be less visible than we show here and have the roof, the green roof come over the top of that. So it's more of a cave-like entrance rather than a building entrance. But the idea is that it could be more structured, it could be less structured, it could be a combination of both. And that's something we would want to work closely with the Parks Department and you all to determine what's the right balance of uses there, once the theater is kind of like a hidden gem rather than an obvious gem.
You want to talk about the green roof?
Sure. Do you want to go to the next picture? Oh, you don't have that, okay. I did have a lot of images of green roofs. I think we're all familiar with green roofs. Around the world, they're very popular now because we're all trying to create a world that's more sustainable and get rid of some of the heat islands that we have that are created by the urban structures of buildings and roads and cars. But locally, a very successful green roof is over the roof of the parking garage, which is underneath the police station.
Right outside.
Yeah,
The door.
well, this too, but the police station one is really nice. It's a really beautiful place. And by the way, I don't know if you know that, but the public is open to go over to the police station anytime and hang out there or go up to that common area on the balcony. That's open to the public. I don't think enough people take advantage of that. But that's a beautiful green area, and that's the roof of the garage. And then this plaza out here, this is the first phase of that. It will eventually be more landscaped and have trees and other things out here once the budget is realized for that. But so the city is already realizing green roofs as part of their infrastructure, and we believe that this has a lot of merit.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I mean, we're totally open to conversation about it. If there are other approaches, we're open to that too. But one very important.
Bless you.
The existing building is 18.6 tall, the new one is proposed to be 17.6. But an important thing that the theater needs to function better than it does today is height. Is the height above the stage for a fly, for scenery, and to be able to hang lights and scenery and all that stuff. A traditional stage is a lot taller than the stage we have here. They do a great job working with the limitations that they have, but a lot of the plays they put on are designed to be a much bigger event than the small theater presents. In order to get that height, we have to go down because we're not going to come here and say we want a 28-foot high building or a 42-foot high building, which is kind of what it would need to be. So going down is our option to not have to go up any higher than we already are. So that's one of the driving reasons for bringing the roof over the top is a way to disguise how tall the building would be underground.
So a couple more slides and then discussion, unless you want to have questions.
Sounds great. I'll come back with questions.
So I thought it would be useful to just have a slide summarizing the current programming. I'm using the word programming loosely to mean that when we are accessing the building and accessing the site. So we don't perform on May 15th, but we begin to get the site ready for performance at the end of June. We don't perform on September 28th, but we are deconstructing and packing away at that time. We, during our summer season, have between 60 and 65 performances typically, mostly in the evening, some matinees. Our newly renewed lease allows for 8 special events per year on that plaza area or in the theater itself. At the moment, we're doing our cabaret series and other special performances at other sites. This is part of the consolidation that I was referring to before, if this were to come to be. Our education performing has really skyrocketed now. We are using spaces all over town. We were under a lot of stress this year because the school was not available to us, but happily Colorado Mountain College stepped up for us and allowed us to make that our headquarters for our classes. We did do the chapel tour. We did a show at the Snowmass Chapel and a snow at the Aspen Chapel. If there's one in Carbondale, I promise next year we'll go there. So we're using every available thing we can because this is a huge growth part of our programming. I think that at the end of the day, any theater can theoretically produce a great production of show X, Y, or Z, but what makes a theater great over time is its commitment to arts education and to its community, and that is where we're putting a lot of resource now, and really throughout the valley, but certainly in this town, working very closely with the school district, teaching classes there. We're launching a tech theater program this year for the first time that they've had with our personnel, so we're very excited about that area. One other thing just before I wrap up to say is that I'm sure many of you have questions about, well, okay, it's going to be a year-round facility, so does that mean it's going to be busy 365 days a year? And what's the impact of that on the park? And can we really tolerate all that? And the answer is that we, for our own programming, are only envisioning 50 or 60 days during what we call the off-season that we would like to activate that are not being activated there now. We activate in other places. The rest of it is really to be determined collaboratively with you guys. There, as you might imagine, a tremendous amount of interest. Would such a facility be constructed from other groups, from other entities, from other individual artists? And we have developed our financial plan for the operations of this theater without regard to getting any rental income or anything like that. So if you all say to us 50 or 60 days and that's the end, we can survive. If you say, well, you know what, we would love it if there were another 50 or 60 days or 100, whatever we might talk about, we think that would be great too. So we are very flexible in that regard. Finally, and I should say 12 full-time paid employees. This is, I know, I've only been in town 4 years, so I am hardly the expert on housing mitigation, and I know that's a tremendously easy topic. But I just want to make one observation, which is that in theater terms, added square footage does not correlate with people. So the fact that this is getting bigger because of the underground thing doesn't mean that now we're going to do plays with 100 actors, because the stage actually is slightly bigger, but not that much bigger. When you have dressing room space, you're not putting people, full-time employees working in those dressing rooms in the way you would if it was a restaurant or a retail store. So we, I think, said in our application that we are contemplating 2 to 3 more full-time employees, and that's true. There would be a theater manager, there would be a maintenance-type person, but it does not take a squad of people to actually manage the building. Finally, we do bring in 50 to 60 seasonal performers, production staff, and our apprentice program, which is pretty nationally famous now. We had 1,000 applications for 23 slots, which is on the one hand flattering and on the other hand horrifying. But we have some really terrific folks. So let me just end with this. We mean it when we say we think this is a collaborative effort. Theater in its nature is a collaborative effort. If you want to be a solo artist, paint a picture, write a novel in an isolated place somewhere. Theater is collaborative. Even a one-person show is collaborative because it needs lights and sound and things like that. So we are used to working that way. We are used to collaborating with all of you. As Alan pointed out, it's been 30-plus years of collaboration as this theater has evolved. We would say, in all seriousness and sincerity, if you're a theater lover, you're going to love this idea because the theater experience itself is going to be improved. The quality of the shows, the environment in which you are sitting, and your ability to access it a greater percentage of the year. If you're a park lover, you're going to like this idea because you're going to get more park space out of it. And for those that find the current structure intrusive to the park, as Charles has pointed out, this de-emphasizes the impact, the visual impact of the theater. So I think park lovers will be happy. And if you're an Aspen lover, if you're a community lover, you're going to be happy because you are going to get more education programming. You're going to get a resource that can, if it is the desire of the community, to be used by other groups more often. And you're going to get, as I said a few slides ago, really a treasure, asset that will last for many, many decades when I'm being rolled out onto the stage for my curtain speech and beyond. I end my remarks every night on stage by saying, thank you for caring about our little theater, but thank you for caring about Aspen, the most beautiful place in the world to make art. And I didn't know very much about Aspen before I started here in late 2017. I sure know it now, and it is the most beautiful place to make art. And I think we can work together on this. It's not easy. This is not a 10-minute, oh, we got it all figured out. Here's the irrigation, it's done. This is hard, we understand that. But we are committed emotionally, financially, and as you can tell with great enthusiasm to working through that to get to a really good place with this. Thank you all for your time, and we are here for questions and comments.
Thank you, Jed. Thank you to your team. I want to start off by thanking also our OST board as well as P&Z members for being here tonight. And I also want to say to members of the audience that are here, we see you as well. So whether or not we're taking public comment this evening, your presence here is appreciated. So thank you for coming out tonight. A couple of yes, Amy.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say we do want to do a very quick staff presentation before you totally go into your discussion.
Thank you. A couple of questions just from what the presentation. I just have a couple of questions, and then we'll go to staff presentation. Charles, you talked about the height of it. How deep of excavation are you expecting?
I don't recollect, it's about 14 to 16 feet.
14 to 16 feet from grade.
Yes.
And then you have some really great images here under your inspirational images of maybe comparable or similar facilities. Could you tell us, name a few? If people were interested in seeing more facilities that are like this, could you name 2 or 3 that we might want to look up?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. There's a great park in Seattle that's used to be a rail yard, and it's now still rail, but it's covered over with green roof and buildings that are surrounding the rail yard now. I'll get you the name of that. Seattle something park. Some of the other images, some are in China, some are in Norway. They're from all over the world. And a lot of parks. San Francisco has a park in similar nature. But there are a lot of park structures around the world that have done similar things. If you think about Boston Garden is over a parking structure. So that the Boston Common area. So there's a lot of examples that have been around for a very long time where the landscape has been brought back over a structure that serves a ppurpose but doesn't necessarily want to be seen.
Thank you.
In Seattle, it's called Olympic Sculpture Park. And I also would perhaps think a little bit bigger than our size that was literally built out into the Hudson River. And it has a combination of multiple performing arts and landscaped areas and outdoor sculpture and activities for children. It's really quite lovely. You walk over this sort of bridge, our bridge, but actually over a little bit of water, 2-minute walk, and then you're on Little Island. So that's kind of beautiful as well.
Thanks.
Tori? I just want to mention to you one of the most successful Millennium Park in Chicago, which is over rail yards.
And I don't know if it really qualifies per se, but Harris Concert Hall, you know, green roof in town, and there you go. And they needed the height for the acoustics.
Thanks. Okay, so we have a staff presentation coming up, but I'm going to look around real quickly. Does anybody have any immediate questions from what you just heard before we get into a longer discussion? Anything quick? I'm going to look next to myself. I'm looking online as well. Ward and Skippy, I sent you a message. You can raise your hand digitally if you've got any questions, but we're going to have staff presentation. I'm looking at P&Z members. If you have any immediate questions. Open Space and Trails, looking for any immediate questions? All right, thanks.
I'll come back for the water.
Put Skippy on the big screen.
Okay, thank you. We'll try to keep this brief. Amy Simon, Planning Director, here with Austin and Matt from Parks Department. And what I've just put up is 2 slides here. Sorry, I'll get this to expand. with questions that were in your packet that were prepared by both Parks and the applicant as possible discussion points for tonight. As a sketch plan review, Jim True already gave you a summary at the beginning. This isn't a decision-making meeting. It's important feedback for the applicant to determine to what extent they should go forward, whether the city manager would authorize their land use application because the city owns the property. We have at this point not done any kind of land use review. There are a number of processes involved. This is close to the river. There's growth management, there's design review, quite a few things that have to be taken into consideration, transportation, all kinds of things, construction viability. So with that, Parks is only one of the referral agencies that planning would reach out to. APCHA and engineering and others would be involved as well. But because this is in a park setting, they're an important partner to have at the table here to talk to you about their ideas or questions for you. So with that, Matt, would you mind, or Austin, running through the slide a little?
Absolutely. I'll get started here with a quick introduction. And so, Mr. Mayor and members of council, thanks for having us tonight. And I just want to start off by acknowledging Jed and his team at Theater Aspen. We really, really have appreciated working with them over the years. They've been great tenants, but more importantly, they've been great partners to work with. And so we're very grateful for their team. Also, specifically, the planning team that they've brought to the table here, we couldn't be more pleased with. It really, truly is the A-team, so thanks to Charles and Alan for being here as well. And with that, I absolutely want to acknowledge that we also get really excited when we hear that the ideas of expanding park space and enhancing the John Denver Sanctuary. These are all fantastic things that we should be striving for, and absolutely appreciate that. I really want to acknowledge and appreciate Jed's comments earlier about the complexity of this project, and Alan also mentioned the care of the planning that's gone into this community space over the years, and I think these are all really important things that we consider as we move forward here. And with that in mind, specifically at the Parks Department, we've had a number of public-private partnerships over the last handful of years that we've learned a lot from, and that we agree that careful planning is absolutely critical. And with that in mind, we've started to develop some questions that kind of dive into some of the details that'll be associated with this. And I think really taking a careful look at the realities of whether it's a green roof and the maintenance of that, or the care of that, the construction of that, access, all these items are important things that we start to consider so that we do get them right for the future. Because if we're looking at a year-round facility, it's going to be there for many years. We want to make sure that we get it right this time, and we absolutely see opportunities for large improvements down there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Kuhn, our Parks and Open Space Director, and he'll dive in a little deeper.
Perfect, and thanks, Austin. Really, I think these ideas are exciting and they're tremendous. And I think that as stewards of the park, we start asking ourselves a number of questions, and I think we have an obligation to ask some questions out of the gate that hopefully guide and set up this proposal for success if we're heading that direction. The park, and I think Alan did a great job of illuminating the history there. It's just in the recent past that we completed it, and I want to make sure that we recognize that when we set out both in '88 and '95 and then in 2011, we've gone through this iterative approach to the park, and the completion of John Denver Sanctuary has been used. And so as we're faced with a potential recreation of the park, I think we need to recognize that this is a very big decision. I think Austin mentioned the devil's in the details here, and we have been through a couple private and public partnerships recently at Cozy Point Ranch with 2 leaseholders, as well as the Lift One Lodge development. And having worked through those processes, we've learned a lot. And it highlights that the more details that we can solidify and put together at the onset, the better it is for not only staff, but for the community as well. And so within the memo, I touched on probably about 4 or 5 additional kind of questions beyond the threshold questions that the applicant put in around design and scale. I wanted to quickly summarize what we see as kind of the initial questions at the parks level, and then, you know, at that point, allow the discussion and the questions that you all have. There's dozens of decision points ahead, not just these 7 threshold questions and the 4 or 5 questions that we have. We see that the first one that we really need to understand is the selection precedent. We look and have used RFPs for selecting tenants. And I'm not suggesting that we should ask Theater Aspen to propose an RFP, but I think it's important to look at the equity of allowing a large change to this park space. The second point is the lease terms. The current lease states that the purpose is for placing a temporary tent, and certainly we're changing that by constructing a large permanent building. And that's something that we need to look at. The current lease area is about 19,000 square feet. By my notes, the new lease area would be somewhere around 37,000 square feet. And I think we'd also look for some other formalized agreements and easements that I'll touch on here in a moment. So we're almost doubling the impacted area of the sanctuary. Just to put it into perspective, the proposed square footage, if it were a square lot, we could fit 13 tennis courts in that space. And so it's no small amount of space for us to consider and contemplate from a park management perspective. Certainly it's been an art park throughout all these years, and I'm not suggesting that it be returned to recreation or something else. I just wanted to highlight the scale, and in a relatively small town like Aspen, it's important. Every square foot of park space is valuable, and there's a variety of interests in that space. The third point that we're asking for consideration on is access and easements, and we touched on this briefly during the site visit. Currently, traffic flows from Rio Grande Place to Mill Street. We see a variety of uses. We see both the load in, load out of their changing rooms and equipment, but we also see daily trips in vehicles. Recently, we saw a motorcycle drive in so that a staff person could arrive there. And I think that's something we need to talk about formalizing, because using multi-use trails for a primary means of access for everything from trash trucks to service vehicles to ADA access is a detail that's critically important to a park user's perspective. Green roofs are tremendous. We've been advocates of those and have used them ourselves. They're also incredibly challenging to maintain. They present tremendous opportunity for failure, for maintenance, for long-term expenses, and ensuring that we have those agreements about whether or not the green roof is a park space or whether that's a space that Theater Aspen is responsible for maintaining are kind of the gist of the conversations. And then finally, staffing. This is, as Jed said in his very first comment, and this is a very, very big lift, not just for Theater Aspen, but for parks and open space. Because this is city land, we, if are taking on this project, are going to be married at the hip and working in partnership throughout the duration of this project, from application through construction and commissioning. And our experience with the complexity of the Farm Collaboratives application recently with Pitkin County, as well as our interactions and collaboration with Lift One Lodge development, we know that that is going to bear a big burden on our staff, and we want to make sure that we're staffed up appropriately and our work plan reflects that lift. Those are the 5 kind of big topics that I wanted to, or we all wanted to, bring up and make sure that are on the table for consideration. And I want to close with just saying that I don't want these to sound like we're being overly skeptical of this proposal. I think we very much appreciate and find value in the proposal. And the concept is frankly exciting. It could be beautiful. But there is a lot that goes into making this happen. And that we feel it's important to have an open, transparent discussion, and that we hope that by posing these tough questions out of the gate, that we're able to answer those and work towards a consensus within the community that everyone's aware of what we're undertaking. So with that, hand it over to you guys.
I'm going to put the questions on the screen that the applicant asked for feedback for in their application, and unless you have questions for us, we can back off and let them come back to the table, if that's what you'd like.
Did I see another series of questions from ComDev as well? Okay.
No, we haven't done that kind of analysis yet. We're just trying to help get the applicant and Parks to the table with you.
Okay. That's all for staff presentation at this time? All right, thanks. I'm gonna start with John and Rachel. Are there anything, is there anything that you have pressing as a question right now? I'd like to let our other boards ask some preliminaries.
I don't have any questions. I have comments and thoughts.
Great.
Same.
Okay. Then I'm going to start with our planning and zoning members. If you have any questions for the applicant at this time, the applicant's topics for feedback are on the screen, so feel free to share your viewpoint as well. But if you have any questions at this time, I'm going to start with your board. Christine, I'm looking at you.
Okay. I have a lot of questions.
And pull one of the microphones down real close and make sure the green light is on.
Yep.
Okay.
You're good. Yep. Nope, you were on.
Yep. Okay. Mine are not specific to these questions. They're a little bit bigger level. Did the idea, Parks hinted that they'd been working on this with you for several years. So did the idea from this come from Parks? Did it come from Theater Aspen, your board? How did this start?
Well, I'm going to let Charles start because it preceded me, actually.
Right. I've been working with Parks, it's on. I've been working with Parks for many years. I mean, and also the theater. Jeff and I had conversations about this way long ago, even when the John Denver Sanctuary was being proposed and the site was, what is the future possibility of the site? The site had endless potential, and where would that take it? The growth of the theater has been incremental over as it's been popular and as it's had traction in the community. It's had the need to become a more serious element in the community. There was a point where we need the theater to be a bigger facility to be able to do the work that they do. And the only way to do that would be to go to underground. And Jeff was supportive of that idea. In fact, some of the drawings, the early drawings were done by Jeff and Kevin Dunnett when he was with the Parks Department. So it was truly collaborative, probably 6 or more years ago.
Okay. And then in the presentation, you mentioned that there's an unmet demand for theater spaces. Do you have any sort of data or to support that besides sort of like your own schedule at the theater?
Well, the support for that, I think I referenced the Wheeler Annex situation, which has been debated back and forth for quite a long time. All of the performing arts groups in town are limited by the number of indoor spaces and how they are fitted out. They each have advantages and they each have disadvantages. So the Wheeler, in terms of being structured as a professional theater in the sense of the full-size shows that we do, is not commodious. The seating sizes for many groups are just too large. They don't attract, they're not capable of attracting 400, 500, 600 people. That's a challenge with the district as well. The district theater, that's an interesting topic because that is primarily an educational facility. And although some have said, well, why don't we just all coalesce around that? We could, but then that would be to the detriment of the kids because they would not be able to use the space if all the other groups were using it all the time. So I think each of us, and at various times when we've come to testify before the council, we've talked about the limitations for everything from Aspen Words to the ballet to us to Dance Aspen. Has no full-time home at the moment, you know.
I was on the Wheeler board when we were talking about the black box a couple years ago, and the city funded a feasibility study for
Yes.
performing spaces. So I'm not sure if you've reviewed that, but that might be useful for council as well. Would the Theater Aspen offices move to this site?
No, they would stay at Red Brick or elsewhere. We have, in what Charles drew, we've planned for just one or two small offices for like the theater manager person, but we would stay where we are.
Okay. And then this is just a clarification question, but because I'm coming into this new, does this essentially, what happens if Theater Aspen goes away? Like, if you build this and Theater Aspen, we would all, be devastated if that happened. But what happens if the organization fails? Is the city left with a building, or what happens?
Well, I think on the list of 7, 12, 52 questions, that's to be, of course, negotiated. But in a general sense, if, God forbid, I'm already palpitating, Theater Aspen were to go away, the city would have a performing arts center or facility that somebody else paid for. I can't see that as a terrible thing, necessarily.
But it's, we have to plan 50, 100 years out.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the world, that would be a great bomb shelter, too.
I won't take up too much more time, but do you guys have?
Hang on. Did I understand in your proposal, there's a main theater of 275 seats, and then is there another?
There's 100, there's what would, theater term would be a black box space that could facilitate up to 100, which would be for education classes. It could be a rehearsal space, which now we have to do off-site, we can't do there. It could be configured for community meetings. It could be used in a million different ways, because you can imagine the chairs go against the wall and you can do it any way you want.
I think it's labeled as rehearsal space on the floor plans that are in the documents that you received. So it's one of the spaces in the drawings that you've seen.
And it's a necessary component to theater operations, or is it truly an additional theater space?
I think it's a consolidation asset. So in other words, instead of driving back and forth people and equipment to the dance progressions or to the schools or things like that, we'd be able to consolidate activities in one building.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen?
I have a question kind of related to Christine's, that through most of its life, the Wheeler, which is a jewel, and over 130 years, it has been a ward of the city to one extent or another, and it is one facility. If we are duplicating some of the purposes for which Wheeler is used, it gets to viability over the long term. Have you kind of presented among yourselves a budget for the construction and for the ongoing use of this facility?
Yes, I mean, without knowing sort of the scope of what this group, I mean, this is a lot about what this meeting is about, is to say, is this the 50 days a year, or is it the 150 days a year? Is it the, and those things will have impact on that. The Wheeler is absolutely a jewel. It's a specific kind of jewel. The theater equivalent would be, it would be called a town hall in current terminology, which means it's fantastic for a lot of things. It is not fantastic for everything. And also because of the Wheeler's very productive and long-standing relationship with the music festival, it is unavailable for a significant chunk of the year when a lot of us are also doing activities. So there's practical issues as well as conceptual issues.
It's unavailable most of the summer, and that's when the theater is most vibrant.
And I think that history is because the MAA stepped forward to help pay for the renovations after the fire. and have a very long-term lease on that.
Oh, yeah, I'm not
Oh,
criticizing.
no, I'm
by
just
any-
saying there's history as to why.
Anything else, Tom?
No, thank you.
Sam?
First off, I'd like to say I love the idea because when I'm like hiking up Smuggling, I look down at Aspen, I see a forest with a town in it. So like adding more green space, it seems like the best of both worlds between a park and having a theater. The questions I have are, the first one is how will it be funded? Will any of it be taxpayer funded or will it be
All privately funded.
all privately funded? Wonderful to hear. And then the other part is, what will the environmental impact be, like while construction is going on, and will the old theater be recycled or put in the landfill?
Why don't you comment on the, during construction, and I'll comment on the, what happens to the old theater.
Okay, yeah.
Well, the construction, well, they're gonna have to be a pretty serious construction management plan, part of which is the sustainability aspects of the construction. How do you control dirt and air pollution and things like that from the movement of earth? And how many trucks and trips and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, there'll be serious considerations of how that's managed.
Okay.
One of the interesting questions, I don't want to go to Christine's place of if Theater Aspen goes out of business, but what happens to Theater Aspen while we're doing this, right? It'll take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And that's where the repurposing may begin. But in other words, we are a tent. So in theory, you could pick it up and move it somewhere. I'm not saying that's necessarily the solution. I don't think we figured that part out yet. But in terms of being recycling and environmentally responsible, that certainly should be our planning goal. I can't say to you, looking you in the eye right now, that 100% of this, will be reused. But it, certainly, we're sensitive enough to this environment that we're in to know that that's the goal. That's the idea.
Other than the tent fabric, almost everything else there is made out of recycled material already. So it'll go through another recycling part of its lifespan.
I mean, that's great to hear, especially since this is a sketch plan review and the building moratorium just went back out of effect today. I think it would be very important to not have that end up in the landfill and to be recycled, especially since you're stewards making green space to not, on the other side, have it end up in the landfill. I think would be huge for your project.
Take it out of one pocket and put it in the other. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
I'm gonna look at open space trails.
Yeah, thanks so much for all this work. 2 questions. My first question is, what other organizations are using the space currently? You kind of touched on maybe there are some partnerships happening.
No, let me parse your question. The reference I made was, I think there are a number of organizations that, if this were to be created, would want to partner in this space. At the moment, we are limited on site because it's, without being temperature controlled, it's only usable 10 or 12 weeks a year, and we use it virtually every day in one way or another. On the other hand, we partner with many organizations in town now, just at other facilities. So we work with the school on their grounds. Many of you came to see The Sound of Music, which we partner with the Music Festival in their tent. We have done things with Aspen Words. We've done things with the Ideas Festival. So we love partnering and collaborating with other groups. We're just limited in what we can do at our facility because it's only usable a limited amount of time.
Well, maybe to just, on top of that, what would that look like maybe if you were to partner with other groups instead of on their space to bring them into your space? What might that look like?
You mean if this idea went forward? Mm-hmm. I can imagine tremendous things happening. A full-blown apprenticeship program with the Aspen school system to take what we're going to be doing with them in the classroom and translate that to a professional theater environment. Dance Aspen, and I think maybe somebody from Dance Aspen might be here. And we have already been collaborating in little tiny ways because they're new and we're just working with them. They're looking for a home, and I think we'd be delighted to work out a scenario where this could be their home. It would require some alterations to the way the stage is laid out, et cetera, and what it's made of, but that's certainly doable. I have said to Susan Rubel at film that we could be available. Aspen Words, we could be available. Community groups, people want to have town halls. Some of the things that I know have been dreamt about for the old city hall that may have some financial challenges, some of those uses could happen. But again, this is all meant to be would have to come out of a collaborative discussion, because I get excited about, sure, I'd love people to be there every night. I'm a theater person, so I want the theater to be lit every night. But I understand that, there's impacts on the park and on the environment that, we can't do that willy-nilly. It has to all be thought through, so.
So we're basically saying two things here. On the one hand, we can create this facility, it can be financed, it can be operated just as a Theater Aspen facility, period, end of story. Or if the community is really interested in seeing these kinds of partnerships happening, you just heard Jed say that the organization would be thrilled to do that, but that presumes that that level of activation of the park is acceptable to the community. We can't make that decision for you. That's why this is a sketch plan review, is to hear how those kinds of variables feel to people and what level of activity we ought to plan for. But if you just say, look, we love what Theater Aspen's doing, and that's the facility that we want to plan here, this can go forward. And it can go forward in all of its glory and be a wonderful addition to the park.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, since it is a public facility, I think that at least for me personally, the idea of multiple entities being able to benefit from this is a benefit for me. Obviously, we need to consider impact on the park, but I think that's a positive to think about more than one organization having access to this space. And also bring that educational programming on site, I think is great for students to be in a real live theater and not, in their elementary school. I think that's really great. Last question, what kind of thoughts have you guys given to the ongoing capital maintenance of this facility?
Serious thoughts. The biggest mistake people make when they build performing arts centers is they raise the money to build it, and then they forget they have to operate it. And that is a bad mistake to make. And that's how theaters get left to towns. So that is absolutely has to be part of our financial plan, that we would plan for an endowment, operating endowment, and, again, depending on what the scope of use is, that will drive what the operating situation is. But, and to what Austin and Matt were saying, this is not a simple idea to maintain. And, you can't say, well, gee, we put $50,000 in a bank account just in case there's a leak. That's not going to do it.
Yeah, love the design and the idea of reclaiming some green space and some park space, and it's all super exciting. And additionally, my last comment is, as we kind of finished thinking pretty deeply about Cozy Point and kind of taking on as a Parks Department some serious financial liabilities, I'll say, it's going to be, I'd say, a huge consideration from a park side of how we make sure this thing gets maintained. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Looks wonderful. I agree with Dan. We have learned a lot from Cozy Point, so I think that that's going to be a recurring question on how ongoing and changes in cost and budgets, which has been happening rapidly lately, will affect this, if at all. I think Matt presented a lot of the questions I would like to see some answers to from a parks point of view, and there were quite a lot there, so I don't think I have any more specific ones than to kind of just follow up when some clarity is added to some of those. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ted.
Yep.
There. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. And thanks for the history. That was really fascinating. So we mentioned the experience with Cozy Point and the experience with leasing and expenses and unexpected expenses and commitments that had unexpected consequences. So I'll leave that to the Parks Department to figure that out. I want to talk about a couple of the environmental things. Well, first, one question. You said it's going from 19,000 square feet to over 30,000 square feet?
Well, I think we have to try to clarify this square foot thing, because we've had a lot of numbers floating around, so.
My take was it was 19 to 27,000 feet, but I guess it's how you describe the periphery. At what point do you say it's theater and what's blended into the park. But the current site footprint's about 14,000 feet, and our measurements, it's 27 is the total impacted area when
Okay.
all said and done.
It says that 14,000 include the back of house, the trailers, all that? So that, basically, the footprint of all the site,
Right.
not disturbance, but type
Right.
of site.
And
Okay.
19,000 feet, if you kind of include, if you look at it the same way, how the edges are affected.
Okay.
But the actual used space is about 14,000.
Okay, and then the finished facility, would that be 2 stories, 2 floors?
It would, yeah, be 2 levels
Oh,
because
okay.
the theater is 2 levels high, just in
Okay.
its own right.
Okay, so I do see some real opportunities, advantages to this plan. One, we were out there today, and, you know, the experience of the heat islands, and with the heat we've been having, if you could replace all that pavement out there with a green roof, you're really mitigating the climate, and that's what essentially this plan is doing. The other thing, it's going to mitigate stormwater drainage, where that's running off the building right now and off the pavement. Quite a bit will be absorbed, unless you've got a leaky roof, but make sure Charles will take care of that. So you're mitigating the climate a bit. The other, you are building more square footage, but I'm assuming it will be, in terms of energy usage, a lot more efficient than what you have now, a temporary tent, particularly with the green roof, which is a great insulator. So there may be a net decrease in energy uses. I don't know, but that's something to take a look at. The other thing, more storage space. So perhaps fewer trips back and forth to the site?
Yes.
So then you're saving some energy in that, the transportation. That does bring up, I think, one of the challenges of how the circulation works out, that pedestrian, and that's something that really needs to be looked at closely. Coming over that bridge is kind of like, oh, I don't know. But anyway, that's something that need to be looked at. The partnerships, again, I think create another really good opportunity with all the discussions with Jazz Aspen, Aspen Dance, the Wheeler, various facilities in town that have proposed to build their own facilities. If this one could accommodate, and as Alan said, you have no idea until it's a more solid idea, but if it could accommodate some of these other uses, again, I think that's a win for the city. The one thing along with Sam, I'd be concerned about, but I'm sure this council will address this, deconstruction of the tent, you know, where that stuff is going. And then the other thing is the excavation. There'll be a lot of excavation, and again, I know this is a current topic. How can that be handled, and not just dragged up to the landfill and dumped? So hopefully there'll be some innovative use for that excavation. The last thing is John Denver Sanctuary keeps coming up in all the polls from visitors as one of the most beloved places in town, and this, from the plans I've seen, is essentially expanding that space. So again, I think another win. Lots of, as Christine said, lots of discussion about, you know, ongoing maintenance. How does it get built? How does the city manage? All the details. But I think overall, it's a really exciting.
We haven't mentioned, but it would also be a good method of sound control, because the sound emanating from the tent now is really hard to control. And it's sort of there's a little paranoia always in the tent, like we can't be too loud.
Right.
And some theater wants to be loud.
Mamma Mia was pretty loud.
Yeah. So there'd be no sound.
Come to Jersey, boys.
The new building would have no sound escaping from it.
I can relate to that. I'm up behind River Bluff, and it's just there. It's not a disturbance, but I would imagine Oklahoma Flats maybe gives a call once in a while or someone to say, turn it down, or how often that comes up.
I have to say, in my tenure, I have not had the
angry neighbors on the plaza,
Okay.
shaking fingers at us. And that doesn't mean maybe it's not happening and I don't know, but we've not had really interaction with authorities about that. I mean, we stop the noise at a reasonable
Yeah.
hour, but for anybody who is put off by that, this will solve that.
But that falls under environmental improvements, because it's not quite the natural setting out there if you're kind of by the river and you can
And
hear
light pollution also.
light pollution too, yeah.
There you go.
True.
Thank you, Ann. Teresa? Thank you.
Thanks, Tori. I have two questions. One, on your sort of proposed questions for feedback, you have the anticipated project timeline, and I was going to put that back on you of what is your capital campaign looking like, and what is your timeline to do this, understanding this is a sketch plan review. And also, if this doesn't get approved, if there is no appetite to put a permanent structure there, what is your fallback plan?
Let me take those in reverse order. We have just renewed our 10-year lease, and I think the fallback plan is to continue to be where we are, doing what we're doing. It's hard to think of, and this is not to say we wouldn't come back and have a discussion about it. It's hard to think of what the in-between scenario is that makes it better, but depending on what the objection would be, how we would modify this, but that isn't to say we wouldn't be open to, to talking about those things. In terms of timeline, in pretend world, I've never tried to build anything in this town, or I've read about it, but I haven't done it myself. But I understand it's very easy. I think that from our perspective, 2 years till shovel on the ground, from some moment of somebody saying okay or encouraging us, and then we have had some meetings with Shaw contractors who estimated 18 to 20 months for the build itself, for what you're looking at. I am automatically skeptical of all those kind of numbers, but I think that's sort of like what it is, maybe 2 + 2.
Okay, thank you. And then one other sort of piggybacking on Ann's is the energy audit. Have you done an audit of how much energy it takes right now to run your facility? Because it's only running, I think you said May 15th through September 30th, which is a short period of time. And then a full year-round structure is going to take, in my opinion, regardless of how energy efficient it is, it probably will take additional energy. And have you sort of done that offset to see how much it's going to change? Because as Sam stated, we just got out of a very big moratorium that talked a lot about energy efficiency and what we can do. And we should, if we're going to do this on city-owned property, we should be a model, not resting on our laurels on that.
Sorry. At this sketch plan stage, we have not done an energy audit yet.
The current building is uninsulated, so all the cooling is just helping to cool the surrounding community. And the same if we were to try to heat that space, it doesn't stay in the tent. So the new building would be far more efficient. It would take additional energy because of the size of it, but most of the space is not heated or tempered to a high degree because it's storage and back of house. But we would do that. We would definitely want to do that because that would be part of our long-term maintenance and operation cost is what is the energy going to cost us over time.
Thanks, Teresa. I'm going to look to Ward and Skippy. If you want to wait, that's fine, but just so I make sure that I don't miss you, I'm going to look to the two of you. I've got a hand up from Ward. So Ward, I'll go ahead and go to you for questions or comments.
Great, thank you. Thanks for everybody that was at the site visit and the comments and engagement from all of you that are present. I have, if I were to close my eyes and say that is going to be available to us tomorrow, I'm going, wow, let's do it. I do have concerns, but there are so many positive outcomes that this could have. I'll kind of go backwards a little bit. Teresa just made some comments about energy audits, and anything that's built there will fall under the new building IQ, I think, as well as a very progressive energy efficiency building codes the city has, and that we will probably be enhancing those maybe in December or sometime soon. So I appreciate Teresa bringing that up, but I think that anything that we build that gets built will come under those new energy efficiency building codes. I really like the idea of returning the roof to the John Denver Sanctuary. For me, that's one of the best places in town is the John Denver Sanctuary. Going back to what Christine said about the black box, and when we were talking, we had discussions about a second performance venue, perhaps in partnership with Jazz Aspen Snowmass. We did do a study on the need for and financial viability of a new performance venue in the lot next to the Wheeler. And at that point, Christina, I remember that we did not have a demand and it would not be financially sustainable. But with Theater Aspen and hopefully partnership with a lot of other venues or other uses, that it's just going to turn out to be financially feasible. And Jed, that's where your numbers and balancing the budget come in. I had a question about, in one of Charles' diagrams, it looked like there was a hill that was being built, perhaps as the bottom line is what Ann brought up about excavation. Is all of that dirt going to be hauled away? Is it going to be used on site? That's the short question for the excavation.
Do you want me to address that?
Please.
Okay. There was some mention of the recycle center being maybe part of the construction management. If we were able to do something like that, we would probably be able to move a lot of the earth temporarily to that adjacent site and then bring it back, so we're not hauling it all the way and then bringing whole new truckloads back. So the more we could do balance of cut and fill on site or on an adjacent site, the more environmentally friendly that would be, and we would certainly seek that as a goal.
Yeah, I think that all of us want to cut down on the number of truckloads going out of town, and if that dirt can be used on site, I think that'd be a real plus.
Right.
Again, Jed and others have mentioned this, but the question of district theater and shared usage, and Dance Aspen coming back, hopefully, to be able to use it, or the district theater, or there was a group that a couple of years ago was saying that they had plans to build a new district theater, and that never materialized, never saw a conceptual plan for it. And I'm just curious how the possibility of that, your venue, Jed, you mentioned that Dance Aspen and some of these other groups could use it, but at what point do they get involved in the project?
Well, I think that that's part of what we're trying to come out with today. I've noted there's been mostly positive feedback about the partnership idea, and I then think we could come back to you and be more serious about saying, okay, 6 weeks a year, or whatever the right number is, could go to this group and to this group. But it's serious, Ward. It's not just, when I was at Lincoln Center, it was all about cross-pollination between all those different constituents. And so my orientation is that you get better art when people collaborate and when people cross-pollinate. So we come from that perspective, and we just have to balance it with usage and not doing damage to the environment. And that's what we want to work on collaboratively. But we're up for it. It's not just a nice thing to say to win the campaign and then those dance people.
Ed, I had a question. I heard that 50 to 60 performances, and I think the memo says, the packet says that that's what is being used this summer. Was that 50 or 60 additional if you go to a permanent structure?
The numbers are actually close, and that's why they're confusing. We said 60 to 65 performance nights a summer now, and we said we're looking for 50 to 60 days in what we call the off-season, between October 1 and May 15th. So
Okay.
they're rather similar, that's why.
Yeah, and I think it was Alan or somebody brought up the question of what is the appropriate usage and programming of that space. And there have been discussions, the old power plant went through a long discussion of how it's going to be used, how it was going to be used, and what it's going to be used for now, and the impact that it has on the neighborhood. Ted, I know you live right up the hill, so you've heard what goes on when there's special events down there. I live up the hill, and when there are parties down there, I can hear it as well. But one of the questions I have is that, Charles, I think you mentioned that the noise bleed from the theater would be pretty much minimal with undergrounding. And so I want to reverse that. If there's a special event in Rio Grande Park, would the theater Aspen still be able to have a performance without it interfering with a live performance or special event in Rio Grande Park?
Yes, we would be totally encapsulated acoustically, so we wouldn't be affected by outside activities.
Some of you were witness to my head spinning off a few months ago with the idea of a rock concert next door to our performances, and I guess the answer is that could happen now if that's what you... I want to live through Ducky Derby first. You're shooting them in the air now or something?
Parachutes.
Parachutes,
But it's too late to bring the Grateful Dead to Rio Grande Park. That's just that's not going to happen, Jed.
Not necessarily.
Jed, how many, you're allowed 8, I think, outside events on the patio. How many have you been using? How many events have been used in the few years that you've been in Aspen?
4 years, but we use what we're allowed. I mean, it is a very pretty place for weddings or private events, and so it gives us not, thousands and thousands of dollars, but it gives us a little extra income. And mostly people like to use the outside plaza. Occasionally, we get requests for using the theater space itself. There's somebody, would not be me, but is planning a wedding where they've hired a stand-up comedian, and they would like to have the comedian perform on stage. Okay.
That's dicey.
Yeah, whatever. But we do use what we're allowed.
Yeah, my concerns, I think Austin and Matt have expressed this, and staff as well, is the how much traffic is coming in there, number one, for construction, and number two, for ongoing support, and how that's going to be handled. And I don't, at first look, I don't like the idea of using the multi-use pass to be servicing a permanent structure, but that's something I'd like to see further addressed.
I think, Ward, what I can say is I would not, try to con anybody. Obviously, there will have to be a traffic plan for construction, and it will be disruptive. There's no question. On an ongoing basis, however, and we are paying to do a study on this, I think it'll be a little bit of a wash, because on the one hand, okay, we're adding 50 more nights, let's say, so that's more. On the other hand, by having a structure where you can store things and costumes and props and things like that, you're actually cutting down traffic. So I have a feeling on an ongoing basis, you'll get to a little bit more in balance.
And I think this will all yield here after this one question, and it's, I think it was Austin or Matt mentioning that the heavy lift that Parks is going to have through this whole design process and construction and ongoing beyond construction, assuming that it's built, is Theater Aspen going to be funding that additional staffing for this construction, or how do you visualize that working out?
I think it goes on a list of a lot of financial discussions we all need to have with each other, and it depends what the scope of the need is and the scope of the use is, and maybe that's balanced by city use for other things, and I just think it's too soon to know that answer, Ward.
Alan, Jed, Charles, thank you for your time. And to everybody sitting around that big table, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ward.
Thanks, Ward.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ward. I'm going to go over to Skippy. Skippy, checking in with you for questions, comments.
Yeah, comments first. Thank you guys all. I wish I was with you. It's so fun to see the room packed. And thank you for all the work. I'll just give you my reactions and kind of take it from there. It's the point of the sketch plan, I guess. My first reaction was, wow, like this is an amazing project. I was so grateful for the history lesson in all of this. John Denver Sanctuary, that whole area of town is kind of like my go-to with anyone new in town to show off. I just think it's the most incredible transformation of a public space into something beautiful. And I think executed correctly, this will really enhance and heighten that. I love the green roof. I love the sort of minimized entryway. I think I would lean towards the even smaller entryway. I think, Charles, you described it as a cave, but maybe more of a portal, right? Where you go from this incredible nature park and all of a sudden are just transported right into this bastion of art. I think there's some real beauty, evocative beauty even in that. I think there's potential here. I love the collaboration. When you were talking about the history, you talked about the hundreds of people showing up moving dirt and that you were yourself part of that. I think that is a moment or an image to really consider when we think about the operation and design of this facility and its integration with the rest. I think our community is at a point, and will continue to be, where we are screaming out in so many ways for more actual tangible involvement in our community, participation in it. And so how do we cultivate a space that really has the broad cross-section of our community participating in it? And so that, to me, is the nexus of the opportunity and my concerns. And I want to see more refinement around that idea, what isn't working elsewhere and how we can do that. Accessibility is a concern and an opportunity for me. We're building this incredible new facility, but it's going to cost a lot of money. And it is the tendency of things that cost a lot of money to want to recoup that money, even when we are a nonprofit, or when we build something really beautiful, even when we have the most beautiful intention of having that open to and shared by community, it becomes more and more desirable, and people offer more and more money to use it. And it becomes easy over time to give into that, even if it's not what you want. And I think a great example is, the bar menu in town, right? We all loved having this communal gathering place where, whether you made a ton of money or not, you could go and you could be in shared community and space with people, and it created a sense of commons in a business environment. But when COVID came around and all of a sudden the economics were different, and we had to, or business owners had to, for survival, change the economic model, even though they loved, and we'll still talk about loving how it used to be, we haven't seen people go back. And so I just want to be really mindful that we are not unintentionally privatizing a public park, creating an inaccessible place, or even a segmented place. This shouldn't be a place in my mind where those who can pay, or wealthy patrons, or a particular type of person goes on one day, and then some other time of year is sort of when we can allow others to go. I really want you guys to give great thought to the integration of all the programming that happens there. And I'd love to see, what do other successful multi-use art facilities do that really encourages that community participation, bonding, and integration? What is it? Some percentage of the tickets for each event are at a lowered or discounted or free price. Are they raffled to make sure that there's equity in it? Is it a certain number of days per year for community use? I'm sure there's a million models, but I really want to see something that harkens back to that image that you so effectively painted of hundreds of people moving shovels. I think that's really beautiful. I love the idea of year-round art. You know, I want to give careful thought to the sanctity of the park and the downtime use and the quietness. But at least in my mind, one of the things that makes Aspen so incredibly special and unique is that intersection of outdoor pursuits, physicality, intellect, culture, and spirit, which I think of as community. But in the winter, we're mostly a ski town, and that stuff mostly happens in the summer. So giving it a home to exist year-round, I think, is something that is something that I'm excited to see intentionally put forward. Those are really the thrusts of my thoughts. Just to round out some other things that people said, green roof is great, but who's paying for its maintenance? What happens when something goes wrong? That's something I really want to see buttoned up. The affordable housing is a big one for me here, for all of us. You know, we've held everyone to the standard, be it the Institute or otherwise. You know, whether we consider it essential or not, there will be no art without artists. There will be no shows without cleaning staff. And so I will be looking for this facility to pay its full weight in affordable housing, knowing that it will benefit from that over time. And even if that means cutting back in other places or raising more money, for me, that's going to be an absolute requirement. See if I'm just missing anything. Vehicle accessibility has been touched on, but I want to see that buttoned up as well. But this is awesome. I'm really excited about the potentiality here, what this can mean for reinforcing and making year-round the idea of the Aspen idea, and establishing a clear anchor for the arts and artists for the next 100 years. So I'm excited to see a little more meat on the bone. And as I'm listening going forward, if I go out of video, I hear the janitor in the place I'm here, keys rumbling around. I think he may be trying to kick me out soon, and I may have to walk outside. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, Gibby.
Do you want to go first, Tom?
I'm going to ask you if you would like to, your comments may be better before or after. What do you think?
I have a lot. So
Go.
I'll do what I can. Thank you so much for the presentation from our staff and your staff and the thought you've put into this. I want to make sure it's not a conflict of interest for me to comment because I have tickets to Jersey Boys for this Friday night. You know, so that's
The seats are not very good.
Okay.
So I think you'll be all right.
Thank you for that. This is fascinating to watch the evolution of the theater as well as the evolution of the park. And it really mirrors the evolution of our town. And kind of reading through these older ones is like, well, we solved the snowmelt problem. We'll just burn it all up with propane over there, you know, and it's like, no, now we don't do that. Now we leased and bought land from the county and we moved that out, but all sorts of different concepts that were cutting edge at the moment have faded away. And we're getting more to the pureness of the park there, I think. I really appreciate that. And it reminds me of the evolution of arts in so many of our other institutions across town. So I wanted to say there were a lot of people participating in that early art park, as Alan mentioned. Hal Clark was one of those people from the Parks Association. And this is the evolution that the Parks Association went from being in Aspen to being the Aspen Valley Land Trust and moved away from just the Aspen moniker and has been doing wonderful work. And Al Bloomquist. And I really particularly want to mention Al because we were there at that first work day and we're trying to make it pretty again. And they're spreading out the gravel. Al started filling a wheelbarrow and rolling it down to the river. And he started building a river trail. And he said, this should be a river trail at this area. And it wasn't on the maps yet, or it wasn't really there. And he's never really been acknowledged for that. But he was the starter of the river trail there. And so I thought that was very important. I guess I'm a little bit of a technocrat, so I'm asking some questions that we don't have answers to tonight, and they're concerns that were coming up for me. But I'd really like to know what the groundwater situation is and how well you really can go underground to go do this that close to the river. And with the experience with the Rio Grande parking garage that wasn't able to build its fourth level down because it hit the underground river. So that's just a technical thing. I know there was questions raised about the site selection and the selection process. And I think that there's some parallels to our older history in the city. Particularly, it strikes me that the Maroon Creek Club, who leased the golf course area that they used, which was Parks open space, some people think the momentum behind that was to keep it from being turned into housing. But one way or the other, it was a single source of a single applicant who asked, can we use this land for this? It will be beneficial to the city. So we do have a little bit of a history there in terms of slight preference. The vehicle access, to me, is really an issue for management. There's the construction, and then there's the ongoing process afterwards. But I'd like to think about, can we use the old power plant area parking for staging as well, perhaps? And or perhaps particularly after the fact. Now, it has to blend in with what the city's doing down there in the parking. But rather than having large Cisco trucks or really semis delivering there in the future, I think they need to be staged into like the power plant, unloaded onto the small golf cart trucks, and then taken over the bridge into the facility. But there needs to be a very severe or strict management plan for the deliveries. There might be time limits that they can only deliver these times of day so that they're not conflicting with trail users and things like that. Yeah, again, we've seen the progression from MAA tent to a permanent tent to the Harris Concert Hall to deal with the issues that we have. I suppose I got a little bit of a different read from the Wheeler study that was done on additional space and things like that. Both the expense of potentially developing that site with the underground utilities and things like that were a major consideration. But they really, I thought, came to a conclusion of it's better to invest in other facilities. And whether it was a district school, whether it's theater in the park, whether it was other opportunities that we had to continue to grow the arts as opposed to the city building a new spot there. So that was kind of what I got out of it. I agree entirely with everyone's comments about building IQ, but this is going to be interesting. Our building IQ program is measuring the use of existing buildings and how can they lower it from there. Whereas this is going to be a new facility that should be built to very new standards. And so I don't know if you measure it when it's brand new and then say now you have to reduce it another 5 or 10% every year. So we have to have a talk with ComDev about how building IQ applies to new buildings. But there is that. Let's see. I really like the shared use concepts and things like that. I think that really needs to go forward. That's, again, in line with the report of investing or having other facilities that can take care of a lot of needs. But I really think that that's something that details need to be worked out too. And I'd like to see that part of the approvals should they go forward. Aspen Chapel was a shared facility with a Jewish congregation, and now they're falling apart, and now they're splitting away. I don't know if it's because there were bad arrangements, there weren't good contracts. I don't know what the difference is, but all I know is it can't work on a handshake. It'll work there for a while, but it won't work there forever. So we need all those sort of terms, and that's things like sharing utility bills and sharing maintenance costs and heat and things like this. So that all has to really be worked out. I will say I'm on board with Skippy. I don't know if it's looking at the overall essential public facilities language that we have, or just talking about it differently. But when ACES came in not long ago for something, we asked them to deed restrict their existing housing that they built, which they built for their own employees, but it wasn't deed restricted as an essential public facility. They didn't, but we asked that they do. And I think every facility of any sort from now on, I mean, even the county is supposed to do an audit. Did they get more employees when they built their new building at 5 years? We're going to make them do more. We're going to be auditing ourselves, and we are planning more housing ourselves. So housing is an essential facility for all essential facilities, I think, going forward. And there was questions about how long has a permanent facility been thought of. I mean, again, it was way back before any of these sort of discussions, but I remember seeing designs that Harry Teague did, and it was going to have more of a Victorian porch feel to it, so you could sit on the porch with swings while you weren't at the theater or things like that. I do like underground better. I think that the youth center lease in the old Tasters building would give us a good example of how we dealt with the idea of what if the youth center closes or something like that. And there was a determined value at the very beginning, and they entered the contract with the city, and it declined every year for about a 20-year period. And at that point, if they left it, it was all owned by the city. And so it's kind of classic real estate transaction about the fixtures that will remain and your ability to pass it along to heirs and assign to fulfill the same mission and things like that. So, you know, groups like, again, AVLT and the Aspen Parks Association, their contracts for purchase of open space and the controlling documents were written so that if they passed on to a successor group in the future, nothing changed. And so there's ways to work with that going forward. I think that this might be a real opportunity for a groundwater heat pump. I don't know. You're very close to a lot of water down there, and it might not be worth looking at, but I know that is how they heated the Institute's new building out there, and so it's worth looking at. This is a funny question or comment here, but I take very seriously our staff's limitations on time. And our own ability, because of the housing crisis, to really make sure every department is fully staffed and it can handle the workload. We are anticipating going forward with our open space and trails half-penny tax question renewal this November. That would tell me, if it passes, a lot more about our staff capacity to really focus in on this and maybe even have a position that is part of just all these multiple project managements and things like that. But that might not be something we can commit at this time. And I think that that's important. Looking at all the lease terms is going to be incredibly important, the access and the easement. Time limited and formalized control. The green roof, yes, I support that. I think I'm not sure I would be able to support a building there unless it had a green roof. But how it is managed and paid for is not something that we can just add to the city's list. I mean, that's got to be really clear going forward. And yeah, I realize there might be some cost sharing or some agreement if we're going to let people up on the roof, you know, but we do need to keep track of not getting into an expense that we didn't anticipate or this beyond a certain limit, and we need to be able to set those parameters. Otherwise, I have to say, I just see a lot of positive pluses in this, just like everyone else has said. I realize it's change, and I realize it could be more noise. I live in the Hunter Creek zone, so near you, and I don't mind the noise, but I heard from neighbors who lived at the Independence Place a couple times during the Janis Joplin shows that they work in the all night, and they have to sleep at night when their shift starts at midnight, and if the band starts playing at 8 o'clock, that was not a good thing for them. So I think that one of the many pluses would be the noise containment and the light containment, things like that. And those are, I think, my comments for now. So I really appreciate your time and the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. John?
Yeah, thanks. I got to say, the proposal looks incredible. Very attractive. I like the idea of expanding the parks. But with that, I do have some questions and concerns. Green roofs are actually a question for me. I've actually built a cabin with a green roof. It was kind of against my will, but that's what the client wanted, and it was foreign to me to think about intentionally putting water on a roof. And I am aware that you can build them really well with state-of-the-art materials that are available now, and within a couple years, if there's a failure, it's much more expensive to fix than a normal roof. That's just a concern of mine. Some of my things will overlap with things other people have said, such as Rachel. I have concerns about the river setbacks, about going 14 to 15 feet below grade right next to the river, groundwater intrusion. There's a famous quote, "The greenest building is the building that already exists." So, again, replacing what's already there is going to have environmental impacts no matter what. There's going to be more greenhouse gases no matter what. And when you change a temporary building that's only being used for a few months during the summer, and you're not heating it in the summer. Once it becomes permanent, and with all the green technology we have, yes, with a larger space, energy efficiency might be very good, but it's still going to be heated or cooled year-round. So that's a concern of mine. Let's see. Okay, my questions. Is Annie Denver aware of the proposal?
She is, and she's supportive.
Good to know. And then an observation that was actually touched on earlier. We currently have so many community spaces that are rarely used, as was pointed out earlier. A lot of the community isn't even aware of the community spaces we have that can be used for public events. Just today when I walked up here, there was music being played in the library next door, a small concert. Really nice. Also, I'd like to see what other organizations are interested in sharing this new space.
Interested?
In sharing this new space. That's all I have.
Thanks, John.
Just one question. Can it be smaller than what you're proposing? And by how much? Can it be 10% smaller? Can it be 15%? Is this the idealized version, or what is the make-do version?
It is not, in the grander scheme of things, as big as that would be great to have. It is modest in scale, considering its location and the programming that the theater is capable of. It could be much more than it is. We did not think of this as a grand gesture. It's a small increase of what the theater does today, but a larger increase of the things they need in terms of support to do what they do today.
Although now that I hear that there was a 1,000-seat theater proposed, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a pie chart that we prepared, and I think the breakout was 63% of the space is in support functions. So in restrooms, dressing rooms, storage areas, and only 37% was in the auditorium, the stage, the concession area, and the lobby. So it's close to 2/3, 1/3 of just supporting kinds of spaces in that square footage. It's really intended to bring a lot of the things into the building that can't happen there today.
Well, again, just, are you saying that should it come forward as a more formal proposal, and whether planning and zoning or the city says it has to be 15% smaller, that would be the end of the project?
I think that there is a tipping point, and I don't know what it is off the top of my head, where it'll cost almost as much to do and be much less practical. So, and I think it's fair for you to say, that's an interesting question to think about and to talk about. And I don't know the answer sitting here today. But at some point, going from 200 seats to 275 seats is not a lot. But if you said, leave it at 200 seats, okay, that's not going to change the world. If you said, don't have bathrooms, don't have the climate control thing, it starts to get expensive to build all this, but not have that in terms of audiences and usage.
And I don't have a predisposition one way or the other. I just felt it was an important question to ask, because it will probably come up with our community.
I understand.
I mean, that's why the 1,000-seat, more parts, less arts was the bumper sticker.
Thanks, Rachel. Well, you've got a lot of input from this evening. This is a sketch plan review, so we are not here to make a decision about this. I think the good news is that you have not heard a resounding no, which means that you could probably still keep working on this. I find myself in the same position as Ward, the note that I put down here. This is one of those examples of, boy, if you could snap your fingers and it was done, it'd be wonderful. But the road to get there has a lot of questions that are still unanswered. I think primarily what you've heard here is, and I'll kind of go through your topics for feedback since that's what you came here looking for answers to, is the current site of the theater tent the appropriate location for the proposed performance facility? I think what you heard in this room is we're not sure. You've got two major concerns. One is the environmental impacts and the location, and the other is the access for future usage. Those were kind of the two main issues when we talk about the appropriate location. We all think it's a beautiful location. We all think that it's a wonderful location for the arts, as it has been historically, but upgrading to this kind of performance facility is going to have some impacts. And so I think you heard two main streams, environmental as well as access. The green roof design, I think you've heard support for that. I think people are really receptive to both integrating it into the park, but also returning some green space where there is not any now. Housing mitigation, you've heard some takes from council members about how important affordable housing is to our community, and your responses were along the lines of we're not seeking to increase our employee generation very much, and if we do, we will take care of that. So that's important to know going forward. The level of usage, and if I'm reading this correctly, you're asking about those future partnerships, how much programming. What you've heard in this room from a lot of people is the more the better, with respect to the park and the park usage. So I guess what most people are thinking here is that if we're going to do such a grand facility, that we'd like it to be shared by the community and we'd like it to be shared with other user groups as much as possible. That leads me to a question about the impact it will have or could have on other venues. So whether that's concerts that maybe the Wheeler or the Belly Up would host, or if that's other events from other venues, District Theater, et cetera, I do wonder about impact to other venues. Vehicular access, that's what I was talking about when I was talking about your appropriate location question. Access seems to be a question for a lot of people here. And Parks Department is not the least of them. I think everybody had some questions there. Appropriate alignment for the utilities. We didn't really get into that very much. I think you were talking about coming down from the main, from Mill Street access as well. So that would be along the same lines of the disturbance and the impact to the park users that would have as well. And then the project timeline, you answered that. It's about a 2 + 2, 2 + 2.5, 2 + 3, whatever that. I mean, it's a changing landscape, you know, literally and figuratively on this, but there's some concerns there. I have been thinking about this coming to us, and for me, this is a public park space. The only reason I believe that this doesn't need to go to a vote for any change in use like this is because perhaps this space itself was not bought just with Parks and Open Space funds. So we have the ability to do this administratively or at least at council table. But I would suggest there might be a route for an advisory vote. If we can get some of these questions answered, there is a municipal election and vote coming up in March, early March. And again, an advisory vote, not necessarily something that organizations want to have to work on a ballot question. I do suggest it be advisory, but for me, this is very much public space. And so I would love to hear the public weigh in on it because it is their space as far as I'm concerned. So that's just a suggestion that I put out there for you. Once again, this is sketch plan review. What you've heard at this point is not to give up. There is a lot of really beautiful, first of all, the work that you've done on the architecture is really taking into account a lot of our community values, and you should be commended on that. Because it's not often that somebody brings back a plan that people are actually excited about. But your willingness to integrate the park, bury it down, lose a foot of height even, I mean, really a real sensitivity. So I commend you on that. As far as Alan and your work, what you've brought to the table here is just the process that we really cherish. We really appreciate you reaching out, checking in with us, checking in with our other boards that have stake in this as well. So really what you guys have done so far as work goes on this is really to be commended and laudable. Again, you've heard varying degrees of excitement about what this could be, with some outstanding questions about how we could get there. And I look at you, Charles, if we can get there. I mean, you know, yes, anything can be built. This is a very sensitive place. So with that, I'll look to the back of the room to my manager, of course, to know if she wants anything else for direction from us.
Can I add a quick comment while she's coming up?
Absolutely.
You know, your comment jogged my memory. I think that when that lease for the Maroon Creek Club of the city land was made, it went to a public vote.
Interesting.
We could look that up. It was just reaffirming, should a 100-year lease be given to the Maroon Creek Club? We'd have to look it up. Thank you.
Sarah?
Sure. What I've heard tonight is there's a lot for Theater Aspen to process. There's a lot of feedback tonight to work with, and we will certainly give them some space and time to do that and decide if they want to go forward. I do think at some point I will need some specific direction from council, but I don't need that tonight because this is a combination of landowner responsibilities for the city as well as lease negotiations if this process were to advance. So we probably look at doing that sometime in the next 90 days. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And I guess maybe my last comment is, you know, I would wonder about the recycling area that was put forth in our memos as maybe an alternative site. And I understand where you are now is gorgeous. It's, you know, it'd be wonderful. But I do ask you if there was consideration there. It may be a path of less resistance and more acceptability. It just might be more appropriate. So I want to just make sure that that's in the back of your head and you do think about that as a fallback plan, not just plan B being not to do anything, but perhaps there's something there.
That would negate the access issues quite a bit.
You have a parking garage right across the street. You could open it up to views down to the river, et cetera, et cetera. Charles, you know, you've looked at this plenty. Do you, as a team, have any other questions for us?
You kind of just jumped into the question that I was going to ask, which is, we're waiting to be given authorization to move into the plan development process, and that only happens if you tell the manager that it's okay as the landowner for us to submit an application. So that discussion that Sarah just started is kind of the outcome that we need from a meeting like this or a subsequent meeting. We can't submit an application. We don't own this land, you do. And the community development won't accept an application from us without the city saying,
right,
you can submit. So that question's still out there.
Okay. Well then, you know, for us, we've made some informational requests from you, and as Sarah has said, we'll have an opportunity for us to get us back together and discuss this at further length to see if that's the path that we want to go. All right?
Yep.
All right.
Is that okay?
Thank you for your evening.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, everybody who's attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for the presentation.
That'll conclude our work session for tonight. Aspen City Council is back tomorrow, Tuesday, the 9th. We have a public meeting starting at 5 p.m. And of course, we welcome public and citizen comment at that time. So join us at 5. Thank you, GrassRoots.
Oh, y'all.
We will see you.